Welcome to the Poultry Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Molnix from Prism Controls. And today we have a very special show. We are going to get to hear all about 100 years of Kreher Farms. We may not cover all the details today, but we're going to get a very good overview from a great individual who's grew up on the farm, Hal Kreher. I'm going to let Hal tell you a little bit more about his history, but before we get too far into that, I do need to stop and talk about our sponsor, Prism Controls. This show would not be possible without Prism Controls. As I introduced myself, I do work there, but we work hard to provide technology for the industry. And in this case today, this is providing history to the industry, a great representation of what this industry is all about. So if you can go ahead and check out Prism Controls online, they've got some great product and would love to help you out there. But as we get started, Hal, welcome to the Poultry Leadership Podcast.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be here. And hey, we use Prism Controls on our farm. We are replacing some of our other control systems with Prism.
Wow.
Throw in one for you.
Thank you, Hal. I really appreciate that. So, Hal, it sounds like you guys have a birthday coming up. Can you tell me a little bit about what this 100-year celebration is all about?
Yeah, well, 100 years ago in 1924, my grandfather bought some 18 acres of land in Amherst, New York. You couldn't tell now that it was a farm. It was his beginning farm, and there was no electricity or gas at the farm, and the road was not really good condition. I think he had to ride a horse the last mile sometimes because the road was bad, but he bought that land. Grandpa was a machinist and worked at Oliver Gear. I was told he cut worm gears that would turn turrets in battleships. And in 1924, he had 54 white lanterns that he came out from the city with to his new farm, and gradually built up the flock to 1,200 birds by 1930. And at that time, he decided to quit his job. In 1930, I can't imagine quitting his job with the Great Depression going on. He was the highest paid guy in the machine shop, but decided he liked farming more, I guess. So that's how it started. And then, so I have some very good articles that I found where they had a good interview with Grandpa. He died in 1955, or I believe 57. So that was a few years before I was born. So I never met him. But I have his words in these articles, so that's pretty nice. So it's, gives some good history of how they built stuff up with their incubators. They got into breeding and selling chicks. And let's see, by 1943, he had a 20,000 egg capacity incubator at his farm and would hatch over 75,000 birds a year. And that's how he got started. He had some contract flocks. I have a letter from 1946 where he's urging people to get their chick orders in because they ran out the previous year, and describes how he was working with some different other growers to produce more eggs, to produce more chicks.
So your grandfather quit a very high-paying job that was very stable during the Great Depression to follow his dreams of being a farmer.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
It's inspiring. I mean, he didn't know what the Great Depression, I don't know the time frame around the Great Depression in that area, but my goodness, what an inspiration.
Yeah, so then in 1950, my dad and mom got married, and my aunt and uncle, and the four of them, the farm purchased the land that our main office is now here in Clarence in 1950, and the four of them moved into the farmhouse, which, just Grandpa moved out to no electric and no gas and stuff. They moved into a house with no indoor plumbing in 1950. I think they went at least a year with no indoor plumbing till the women rebelled against their husbands. Of course, they're doing all the work, too. They convinced the husbands that they had to put in some bathrooms. Then they got their indoor plumbing. But, so Mom and Aunt Margie, they were both instrumental in the farm. They would do the egg grading and produce a lot of the workers, and me and my cousins, and so they helped out greatly, and were able big part of the success of the farm. So Dad and Uncle Don, they were, nowadays they'd be hipster farmers. They had birds out on the range, a couple farms going, this business that was turning, instead of being a pullet producing business, into an egg business. When the hybrid birds came out, they just couldn't compete with their, single strain line anymore. They had their own strain of birds that they had bred over the years, but it just couldn't compete with the newer hybrids. They did produce for one of the, I think it was decob for a while, and then the hatchery just, didn't make sense. So we got more into egg production in the late, probably early 60s, I would say, is when I started more into egg production.
Okay, so how many, let's say early 60s, how many eggs were being produced, or how many birds was your Uncle Don and your dad responsible for?
We may have had like 75,000 at that point, something like that, between our own farm and some contract farms. The farm that they bought in 1950, they had an old dairy barn, gambrel roof barn with a hay mow. Well, Dad, Uncle Don, and my Uncle John, they added 2 more floors to it. It had 4 floors to it. The first floor, all the way up, and an elevator shaft to haul eggs up and down. So they didn't have to carry them up the stairs. A stairwell included a little feeding area. They added on a 2-floor enlargement to it for birds, and these were all floor birds, of course. And that's what I remember was the 4-story barn and what we called the new barn. It was a floor barn with slats down the center and the egg nests on the wall and a trolley to take down the length of the barn and put, hand gather the eggs out of the nest and put them on flats, put the flats on the trolley and roll them out to the front. There were 10,000 birds in that barn. But, my early memories are that barn, because that was built in 1960. I was born in 1963. And what we call the old barn, the 4-story barn. And, we had different things. I can remember being a little kid, being warned about the feeder, keep your fingers out of the feeder. And, I was probably just who knows how old I was, 4 or 5, walking through the barns. I'm sure I was in there even younger because, that's what people do. They take your kids in when you're doing something, and that's what we did. We had floor birds, and there were issues we had with the drinker technology was very poor. Like we had trough drinkers. And so one of those would tip over, make a horrible mess. The feeding was automated. Again, we had to hand gather the eggs. Growing up, we always had those eggs we had to hand gather. And these were nests on the wall that had what we call a mailbox across the front, where the eggs would roll out of the nest into a tray that had a lid and a nest stick on top where the birds could land and then walk into the nest. Well, when you came through and gathered the eggs in the afternoon, you didn't want the chickens to sleep in the nest, so you put that nest stick up in front of the nest so that chickens didn't have access to the nest. And most of the eggs are laid in the morning, so it wasn't a problem with making floor eggs at that point. You just did that to keep the chickens out. You had to do that for a few, I don't know, maybe a month, the first month to train the chickens. And go in at night and pick the chickens off the floor and put them up on the slats, again, to keep most of the manure up in one area. So it was the kids' jobs to go out at night and put the nest sticks back down. And that's a bonding experience when you're doing that with your brothers. And so sometimes it would get to be a race. I was usually the younger one. I'm the 4th out of 5 sons. I also have 2 sisters, so only Brett's younger than I. And so the bigger kids could run faster and stuff like that. So we'd go through and put the nest sticks down, and then it was a run back to the house in the dark. And, so that's terrifying for a little kid. It was uphill, but that's how I learned to run fast. So it's some fun stuff looking back on it.
So it's interesting. Some of the technologies now that work to close the nest, that work to automate all of those processes. You guys were way before your time, before the birds, started going into more of the conventional housing. I go back to the numbers. Your grandfather left and kind of left and on his own and started this barn at 12,000 birds, and then you're
1,200. Got to 1,200.
1,200, not 12,000.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's when he jumped out, and then your uncles, your dad and your uncle got it up to 75,000.
Well, they retired in, I think it was 1993, and so by that point we probably had 400,000.
400,000. Okay, so 75, 400,000, and then today, how many birds do you guys care for?
We have, in November we'll have 2.5 million. We have a building going up right now. It's a fast growth when you look at it that way, isn't it?
It is. It's just impressive. So looking back, you had your older siblings, and your aunt and uncle lived with your mom and dad, which is just crazy to think. With a year of no indoor plumbing. Heck, I've had a bathroom project going for the last month and a half, and I think all of my family are ready to kick me out because they don't have one part of the plumbing or another. And to think, a year without any indoor plumbing. Wow. That's crazy.
And then they lived in the same house until there were 8 or 9 kids between the two of them. Uncle Don and Aunt Marty lived on the second floor, or Mom and Dad lived on the first floor. So I can't imagine that either quite.
It's all about family at that point. You're co-raising kids while everybody's out expecting to work, because it's not only did you guys have chickens, but you also started and work in the crop farm. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we all along we had some cropland, not too big. Probably grew in the 70s. We had we bought a farm down the street, and so we had maybe 500 acres we were farming, something like that. And it was to get rid of the manure. This you had to have somewhere to go with it. The manure got to be a big problem though. We had liquid manure, and I don't know if you've had experience with that, but liquid manure smells a lot worse than the dry manure. It just has anaerobic decay and produces some very nasty odorous compounds that really take a lot of dilution until you can't smell them anymore. And so it's pretty bad. We had that until 1994 when we switched over to composting. We did have some issues with the neighbors when we were doing that liquid manure that hindered our growth until we had something different.
Okay.
And when we came up with the composting, then we were able to see, okay, we can keep farming where we are. We're the first farm you get to coming east out of Buffalo on Route 5. It's one of the major routes. Before the thruway went in, it was the major route, one of them. And there's a lot of houses here, and we had to figure that out. But we went to composting in 1994. It had a lot of benefits to us. It made the manure so flies weren't interested in it. I mean, before that we had high-rise buildings where the chickens were on the second floor, manure was on the first floor, and clean it out once or twice a year. And in between those cleanouts, the flies can get pretty bad, the mice can get pretty bad. It's just not a great system. So we switched to the compost, and we weren't storing manure in the chicken house anymore, taking it to a compost building. Within a day or two, the flies aren't interested in it anymore. Doesn't attract flies once it starts composting, or it's too hot for rodents to live in. And so, it does a big change for us, and something that really allowed us to go to the next, take the next steps. And, we started producing compost and selling that to other farms. And we found that the market for that was with organic farms. So there's a large organic farmer down near Penny in New York. His name's Klaus Martins. And we started talking to him, and he said, well, you guys make this stuff. How come you're not farming your crops organically, and you got the fertilizer for it? We looked at, what that would entail, and made the jump in 1999 into organic cropping. And at the time, I think corn was $2.35 a bushel, and organic corn was $5 a bushel, and so that helped. And that's organic farming is very tough. It's the crop farming. You have to do it just right, and the timing is essential on weed control and stuff like that. It's very hard, and so we've been doing that since then for 24 years. We've cut back recently a little bit on it. Some of the ground, we've had some weeds come in that just couldn't control with tillage, and so we had to switch back on some of it. But then, so the composting, that led us to stack cages. Well, stack cages kind of led us to the composting. They happened at the same time. And so then, we just expanded that as we remodeled our complex over to the stack cages, added another compost building, and took it from there. That got us into like 2000, 2001.
You mentioned the whole manure where you probably couldn't even get rid of it before, and then you made it into a product that actually is very helpful to the other farmers, especially the organic ones. What other big changes have you seen, similar situations possibly like that, or in other areas of the farm?
Well, that's an interesting question. I don't know. That was a real game changer because we were taking a waste product and turning it into something we could sell. It was, I can't think of anything else where we took I guess that we used to dump liquid egg out on the field and found somebody that would take that away. So that was a switch around to something like that, but not nearly to the same scale or anything. But I don't know. That's a good question.
Well, it goes along the sustainability as that topic has really come to focus and across the industry. What's the sustainability story?
Well,
And
sustainability is a great thing to talk about. For farming has been all about sustainability for a long time, although it's really been focused on productivity and efficiency. And I'll tell you, productivity goes a long way towards meeting your sustainability goals because you can, hardly any inputs, but if you don't have any outputs, what good is it, right? Really, for agriculture, I think intensive agriculture has made some of the agriculture more sustainable. I know people assume that by having, 100,000 chickens in a building that, oh my gosh, you must be sick all the time because that's what happens to my little kid when he goes to school. But it's not like that at all. It's the exact opposite. It's 100,000 chickens in a building where the disease is kept out and the vaccinations and different things you can give them in there nutritionally, is what keeps the birds healthy. And, I tell people that, no, we vaccinate for different diseases. We've gotten rid of different things in the poultry sector by using biosecurity to our advantage. And it's a huge thing. And I don't know how we produce as many eggs as, it would take a lot more people to produce the eggs the other way. I know it just does. So we are, the de-intensification that we're going through to cage free is taking more people. It's taking more labor. Nobody talks about that impact of that. I haven't seen the impact of that on the sustainability of it.
well, as a farmer whose family went from floor raised birds to 4-story barns, which I have to chuckle because we see these 4-story barns now and they hold a few more chickens than the one that you guys had there on your farm.
Yeah, because that one did it have 500 chickens on the fourth floor? I don't know. Not too many up there.
You guys were ahead of your time though, and it showed the value of efficiency in having instead of 4 barns, one barn with 4 levels. You guys were well before your time. So Hal, looking back at you mentioned some of your earlier memories were you and your brothers and sisters and shutting the nest. What is your story on the farm, and how did you get to where you got today?
Well, growing up on the farm, you don't know what you have. Well, sorry, Brandon, I get a little emotional sometimes.
Oh, that's
But,
fine.
growing up on the farm, I had to work hard and stuff. And when I went away to college, I decided to go to engineering school so I could get a regular job like other people. And like my friends' parents, and who had weekends off and stuff like that, and vacations. Yeah. And so I went to engineering school and went to Cornell. And when I out, I got a job working for the Navy down in New Jersey and worked down there for a few years. But by then, I had met this. Yeah, that's a good name. By then, I had met my wife, Karen, who, actually she went to school for poultry. And so she knew more about chickens than I did. So she came and got a job working at the farm one summer, and that's how we met. That's a whole other story, which I won't get into, I guess. And so she knows more about chickens than I do. I'll reiterate that. But anyhow, so I moved down to New Jersey to work for the Navy. And then in 1989, my brother called me and said, "Hey, Hal, we're looking at doing something a little different. And we're looking at maybe distributing this beverage, our egg trucks, to, help lower our distribution costs. But we need somebody to run that. And would you be interested in coming back?" And so I said, "Yeah, sure, I'd be interested in coming back." And I didn't really consult Karen, but made the decision to quit my job and come back and distribute Snapple.
Oh,
And so the first thing I did was, go over to the store, and I'd never heard of Snapple before, but I went down to the local convenience store and got a couple of bottles of Snapple, and they had this one tangerine seltzer. And I thought, well, that sounds good, but, I wasn't used to alternative beverages. So we opened it up and tasted it, and it was exactly what it said. It was seltzer water with some tangerine flavoring, no sweetener or anything. I was like, oh my gosh, what have I done? you know. But anyhow, we moved back and we started distributing Snapple in 1989. That business grew very rapidly. By 1994, we were selling over 500,000 cases a year. So it grew really rapidly. The business had to grow crazy to deal with that. And now, instead of having egg trucks with some Snapple on it, we had Snapple trucks with some eggs on them. In 1995, we sold off the distribution rights in Rochester. We had a contract for a large area and had sold off all their pieces. And so we sold off the Rochester distribution rights. Just had Erie County and Erie and Niagara County, which is Buffalo and Niagara Falls. And it just didn't make sense anymore. So by 97, we got out of that part of the business. And then we started a pellet mill to pelletize the composted poultry manure. And again, it was something we didn't have any experience doing. And they kind of gave it to me as a project. Here's this equipment that we had gotten from another company. And, we got to figure out where we're going to put this together and see how it works. And, took a look at the different buildings on the farm. And we had an old building down the street, old barn that we were able to fit this pellet mill in. And we put it in there with all this used equipment and, got that up and running. And so that was another business that we got into. That was fertilizer business. And so that's been a pretty good business for us. It's not a huge thing, but it's been okay. And so then that was in 97. And then we built a second one in that one started up in 2021. So that one started during COVID. That was a very challenging project. So the building took a long time to build. There was, during COVID, it was a complicated building because of the compost building and the pellet mill, a lot of electrical conduits in the floor, wires, going everywhere, which way to different distribution boxes. And then, once the building was built, we had to assemble the equipment and then get that up and running. And, starting up equipment for the first time. We didn't have any vendors on site because it was during COVID. It was a real struggle. And it was one of those times when thing after thing goes wrong. And, you just feel like, oh, I'm trying to do this and that thing breaks. And then I'm trying to do that and that thing breaks. And so one of the guys was really getting down and he was like, oh man, I just can't, this is another thing broke. It's just, I can't deal with this. Hey, look at how much stuff has happened and we've overcome all of it. Every time something breaks, we fix it and figure it out and, make it a little better and we move on. It's just how it's going to go. And I think he understood that, but he was getting kind of down because of the number of things that were going wrong and just, wasn't seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. And it's hard to see that sometimes, but, you just got to give it some perspective and know that you've gotten through, the different things that have been thrown at you. You get through this one too, and it might just take some time.
Hal, as you mentioned, like your college education, you got into engineering, you went on to work for the Navy. Have you thought of like your grandfather through that? Because as you shared his story and his intelligence level and what he was producing during the Great Depression and where you're at today, I mean, so many similarities and stories. It's one of those things where I picked up on that really quickly that, man, that you've got a very smart family. And now You're talking, you're 100 years and you're now starting to transition to the next generation. Can you tell me about the next generation of Kreher Farms?
Well, I didn't talk about my generation too much. Just kind of, well, we
Talk
did, but not
about.
the people in it. And so, my generation of myself and my four brothers, who, he's the oldest, can't help but say that. And he was the CEO. He retired a couple of years ago, but he was like the main leader in the business. He came back in 1978. Then I'll go through my family first. My brother Scott, he worked on sales. He's also retired, but he ran the Snapple business with me because it got to be a big. Every night we'd have to put the routes together of where the trucks were going the next day, and it wasn't on a computer. There weren't any computers. We had, I guess we had a computer to print out the invoices, but then we had to sort them by hand and throw them out on the floor or on the map and rearrangement of routes. That was something. And then next one up from me, Neil. He's 3 years older than I am. Neil's the engineer and really was responsible for making a lot of stuff work and keeping it working over the years. Myself and then my younger brother, Brett. Brett does mostly administrative stuff with insurance, and he's worked a lot with the crops department also. My cousin Don, that's my uncle's son, obviously, Don Jr. He ran the crops department while he was here and helped me. He and I built the pellet mill. I almost said help me. I helped him, I guess. But together with two other guys, we built the pellet mill. And cousin Dave runs the egg packing operation in Clarence here, and also does like the purchasing of commodities. Kurt worked with him on that until he retired, but now Dave's been working on that, I think, pretty much alone. So then in the next generation, we have Don's daughter, Jeanette, and Jeanette works with like the HR department mostly. Kurt's two boys, Mike and Brian. Mike runs the crops department, and Brian runs the egg business. And then Scott's daughter, Natalie, and she is running the fertilizer business now. I've kind of pulling back as I get ready to retire. So she's running that part and also does the sales on the egg side. And then my son, Nate, who's also in the compost and fertilizer part of it. And there's other family members that work in the business also in support roles. But cousin Jim is engineer, works here, but he's not an owner, but works here. My son Aaron works in the feed mill. Again, he's not one of the owners, but he works here. And I have just the other day, a couple weeks ago, one of the guys who works in maintenance out at our organic farm, he said to me, "Hey, I'm related to you guys," and I had seen his name on Ancestry.com, but I thought it was a kind of a common name, so maybe it wasn't him. But he got me his family tree, and I found out he's my third cousin twice removed.
So, as the next generation takes over, Hal, I want you to take a minute and look back. What is one of your proudest accomplishments as a farmer in your generation?
Well, Brandon, in 2017, we bought another egg farm from Wegmans, and the closing was on the day my dad died. It's a farm that's twice as large as our home farm, so it was a huge leap for us. But it worked out really well. Wegmans is a great customer for us. They wanted to have organic eggs, so we decided we would build an organic farm and produce organic eggs so they would have organic eggs to sell. So we did that starting in 2009. That was a very exciting project, and got mostly built out to plans really pretty rapidly. We put in the first three buildings in a pull house, and the next three went up pretty fast. We have 11 buildings now there, but that was a really kind of fun project.
And what about it really just makes you stick your chest out and be proud of it?
Well, it's something we had to come up with our own design. We had looked at other farms and how they were doing things, but it was something where we had to come up with our own design. And it's not like we hired an architect and an engineer firm to oversee the whole thing. We just laid it out how we thought made sense, and then worked with a few vendors to get it built. And I think it looks almost exactly like how we thought it was going to look. They changed some of the rules, so we had to change some of the buildings. But if it hadn't happened, it would have looked exactly how we thought it would look.
That's something to be proud of, is just growing, not knowing, not having the experience of doing it, but just making it all work. And when I think of farmers, I think of exactly what you and your generation did is figured it out. Yeah.
Well, and some of the challenges, there's been times when we've gone too small, because it's always been a challenge of resources, right? You can never build a building as the size you want to build it. It's always a compromise, and you put an electric line in the wrong place or something, and you have to move it later. There's been some times when we've done stuff like that, and I'll tell you, it's a real challenge to see the future, and what are your electrical needs going to be the next time you expand or add on to it. And some of that stuff just takes years in advance to get it done. Like, if you need more power than the electric company has coming to your plant, that takes years to get them to do something. It's not something where, hey, I want to build this next month. Let's get going. And it's hard to get used to sometimes when you're more used to, hey, let's plan it out and just pull the trigger on something.
How do you pass that experience and that knowledge on to the next generation, Hal?
Well, fortunately, there's a bit of an overlap. Of course, the kids have worked in different areas of the business, and so they've gotten experience, and you can tell people a lot of stuff, but some of the times they got to do it on their own, and that's part of them. Part of it, they got to have the freedom to fail, and so they learn.
That's really good advice. So looking back, you've overcome a lot, you've experienced a lot. What was one of the greatest things that you overcame in your career?
I'd say the startup of that pellet mill, that was a real challenge. I lost like 15 pounds. It's 2 hours away from where I live, so it was a few weeks of every day driving it. And, it was a big challenge.
So what did you learn from that event then that you can pass on to?
I think it was just that, hey, you got to just keep working through your problems and realize that, look at all you've overcome in the past, because you didn't just make it here. You didn't just start there wherever you are. You made it through a lot of stuff. And you just got to realize every obstacle that comes your way, clamber over it and get on to the next one. It's all I can say. But, something that's more important is being able to get along with people and knowing, how to deal with it when you're wrong and how to deal with it when you're right. Sometimes you need to apologize for something you've done and, say you're sorry. And, it's best to learn how to do that. And then if you're right, you got to learn how to deal with that too, because nobody likes it when you're right all the time.
I imagine there's been a few times that you've been wrong over your career and had to apologize, and a few less times that you were probably right and got a way to gloat about it, right?
Oh yeah. But that's one of the things. My family is so fortunate. We all get along with each other, and it's not that we all agree with each other all the time. So of course there's disagreements, and sometimes it gets heated. But you can't let it get too far. And then you also got to be able to say you're sorry if you were wrong, and understand that you might be passionate about something, but you gotta, what's more important to you.
Yeah.
And mostly the relationship is more important than being right. And so sometimes even when you're wrong, or when you're right, you got to realize, oh, the relationship's more important than me being right. I got to just back off here a little bit and see how it goes. I've been in that situation, so getting along, I'd say that's been my family's greatest strength.
It's amazing when you're working as a family. It's, you can't really get away from each other because you're going to see each other at Christmas. But
Yeah.
it's so important because when you work at a place, you spend more time with the people you work with than your own family. And getting along, you have to have that respect for each other, that ability to understand each other, because as a family, you knew how each other grew up, you knew the morals, the values, but start expanding that network, it gets a little bit more challenging. And what are some of the biggest things that you've seen in as a change in the industry since you started?
Well, I'm just going to step back and say, hey, one of the best things we ever did was we came up with a list of our shared values. And at the time, I thought we were spending a lot of time on this, but I've had so many people comment to me on, hey, because we got them posted up. These are our shared values. And it's integrity, do the right thing, do things right, be a good neighbor, caring, teamwork, sharing, work ethic, forgiveness, and gratitude. And, we try and live that. And the people that work here, they know we try and live that, and they try to live that. And I've had people come in for a job interview and say, well, the reason I'm in here is because I saw your shared values. And I thought it was interesting that something I didn't, at the time when we were doing it, I didn't realize, again, the impact it would make. But it's been a really important thing for us. And it's been part of, that was done as part of our generational transition, just to how to pass this along.
I'm glad that you guys did that exercise. You post them and then you live them, because that's the key. Is you can have all the values written down you want, but you got to live them.
Yeah.
Sounds like you guys live them out.
Who wants to work for somebody that makes their living ripping people off,
Yeah.
or something like that? I don't know. I can't imagine how, when you're working at a farm, it's somewhat fulfilling. You're producing food for somebody else. You're taking care of these animals. And, there's just a lot of parts that are fulfilling, when you get a project done. I know we didn't realize how important the business was to our employees for a long time, until it was shortly after I came back in the, might have been early 90s. One of the women that had worked for us for years and years in our egg packing room didn't show up for work one morning. And so my cousin went over to her house, and she had passed away. And so we went to her funeral, and her family, this was a woman who really, while she was at work, really didn't have the nice thing to say to us, but her family was like, oh, she talked about the farm all the time. And, the different people that work there, and, I can to feel like I know you guys. And it was like, wow, here's somebody who didn't really seem like they were having a good time, but, that their job was extremely important to them. And, so then, it really opened our eyes to that. And, once you realize it, well, of course, it makes sense. And, we have people who have worked here for their entire careers. And it's very fulfilling when you have somebody who works here a long time, gets to retire. We've had people that have worked here a few years, and then for whatever reason, they move on to something else and then have come back, stuff like that. One of our complex managers is a guy who started here in high school, and now he's complex manager.
Says a lot about your company if people are willing to come back after leaving. That always says a really good thing. And then to look out in your community and to see the lives that your farm has been able to affect with houses and families and the community that you're part of. And that's truly what, to me, business is about. It's not necessarily about the product, but about the lives that you're investing in by providing them an income, and then seeing how that affects generations.
Oh, and then, you get some true friends. Some people, they'd walk through fire for you. Anything. I got guys I know I could call in the middle of the night and ask them to do anything, and they'd do it. One year we had what they called the October surprise storm. It was October 13th, I think it was maybe 2006, something like that, where it was October 13th, and we got 3 feet of snow, and the leaves were still on the trees. So all the trees broke, and you couldn't drive down the road. Took me 45 minutes to get here, what normally takes me 7. And I had to drive over down wires and not take the backtrack and take a different route and all sorts of crazy stuff. And I show up at the farm, and here's a bunch of people are here. You know, even though they're facing a disaster at their own home. You know, one guy's got a branch through his window at home. He threw up some plywood and got to work. You know, I mean, all these people showed up at work for that day, even though they were experiencing their own disaster. It was really amazing.
Says a lot.
You know, the guy who was his first day of work, he showed up. Yeah, that's funny.
Hal, is there anything else you want to share with our listening audience about the Kreher story and just whether it's the future or some of your favorite memories?
Another early memory I had is we used to sell eggs right out of the house. There's a little room on the side of the house where customers could walk right into the house. And there was a cooler out there with eggs in it, and door was rigged up so the bell would ring if somebody came in, and, you know, somebody would run out there and, oh, what do you want? And make the change or whatever. And people would take their eggs and go. And that's what I had to do. You know, I did that as a little kid. You know, when you're a little kid, it's like a game kind of thing. And you learn how to make change at a very early age. You know, that was kind of a fun thing. There was one guy who would come usually like, were we still be eating dinner or right after dinner? And he was a plainclothes policeman, I hope. Because he would pull aside his jacket to show me his pistol. Not in a threatening manner, but just as a, you know, something cool to show a little kid. It was kind of funny.
And I'm sure you've got 100 more stories that of over the years of whether it's the business or the family has made a difference in your life, as well as, you know, you've probably got great stories to share about things. And maybe there's stories that you just never will share because they're your private ways of helping your communities. Hal, I really appreciate your time today and sharing your stories with the listeners here. Those are the real stories that people actually want to hear about the industry. It's not about the number of eggs you produce. It's not about the number of birds. It's not about the style you use. It's really important is the people, the families, the personalities, and the legacy that is behind farms like Kreher Farms. Well, Poultry Leadership Podcast listeners, I hope that you've enjoyed this walk down memory lane for Kreher Farms and the fact that it's 100 years that they have been providing their community with one of the most incredible products in not only eggs, but in other products as well over the years. And so I appreciate Hal for joining us today. And as I end this podcast, I'd really like you to share this story with other listeners through subscribing to the podcast, by sharing it on your social media. Get the word out about Kreher Farms in 100 years. It's not just about the Poultry Leadership Podcast, but this is a true farm story that needs to be shared with others. So thank you, listeners, and I look forward to our next time we get together. Have a good day.